My name is Steve Brown. I'm a pharmaceutical buyer. Today I brought in a medical glass that belonged to Captain Harry Dunlop, who was a member of the 102nd Battalion Canadian Army Medical Corps in World War I.
The First World War lasted from 1914 to 1918. The scale of suffering from injuries and illnesses stemming from trench warfare was extraordinary, and may have been much worse were it not for the Herculean efforts of the Canadian Army Medical Corps. Established in 1904, the role of the CAMC was clear: keep Canadians alive. It was tremendously difficult, but through field ambulances, clearing stations, general and stationary hospitals, doctors and nurses brought hope to an otherwise hopeless situation. As threats of new weapons emerged, medical interventions had to adapt. Demand for treatment became so great that 50% of Canada's physicians travelled overseas between 1914 and 1918. Remarkably, almost 90% of those ministered to by medics survived.
Welcome to Military, Steve. And I was wondering if you could just take a moment and let us know what you brought in today for us.
Well, what I got today, it's a small item. It's a military glass that doctors would use in their field hospitals, dressing stations, to administer medicine to the wounded soldiers that were being brought in. Mainly this one, I believe, would be just for liquid, and it was carried by the doctor on his belt. And this particular glass belonged to Captain Harry Dunlop, and Harry was in the 102nd Battalion, CEF, in World War I.
And how do you know that the glass belonged to Captain Dunlop?
Well, when I purchased it, in the pouch itself, there was this little ticket. And on that ticket was a family member's name and information. And they'd actually written that this glass belonged to Captain Harry Dunlop, who served in the First World War, and he was wearing this on his uniform.
So Steve, can you tell me what you know of Harry Dunlop's life after he graduated from Queen's with his medical degree?
Well, after he graduated, he went down to New York, where he spent 2 years in medical training. And once he was finished there, he actually took a position at a hospital in Peru. So from 1908 until 1916, he was at the hospital in Peru. And in 1916 is when he decided he wanted to do his part. And he left Peru and returned to Ontario to join up and start his military training.
And from his service file, I've read, and as you say, 1916 is when he was tested into the Canadian Expeditionary Force as a doctor in the Canadian Army Medical Corps with the 4th Pioneer Battalion. So he was their medical officer that was assigned to them and went overseas with that battalion to England until it was broken up there. He was then sent to the Canadian Army Medical Corps depot. They went there, and then they were assigned where they're needed, and he was posted to the 7th General Hospital, which is the Dalhousie Hospital that was raised from the doctors and nurses in Dalhousie University here. So I thought that was interesting. So this all belongs to Captain Dunlop. So what's the connection with the photo and the medal here then?
Okay, so during the First World War, Harry was, in my opinion, doing the research on him. He wasn't your average physician, okay, because a lot of the physicians, they were needed to stay behind the lines and, take care of the, save the soldiers, perform operations. But it seems like, from what I find, is Harry was probably one of the first ones to look at doing like triage, meaning he would go in the field. He actually went into the battle with the soldiers. So I guess he figured the quicker he got to the wounded, the better chance they have of surviving. So when they went over the top, Harry went with them. Now, I've never heard of that in any other doctor, physician, going into battle with his troops and taking care of them as they fell.
So Steve, we discussed him being awarded the Military Cross. Unfortunately, it wasn't gazetted, which meant published until after he was killed. So let's talk about what happened that he was like. What were the circumstances around him being killed?
Well, it's sad on 2 points. The big one is the fact that he made it that far and he was killed, and the second part is when he was killed. Okay, so what happened was after an engagement, he was resting at battalion headquarters in the cellar, and the Germans started shelling the area and shelling the town. And then there was commotion upstairs. There was a stretcher bearer had come to the door looking for Captain Dunlop, saying that the Germans had shelled the village and there was wounded civilians.
And what village was this?
I believe it was Hanoi.
Yeah.
And so Harry, being who he was, grabbed his gear, and just as the stretcher bearer and Harry were getting ready to go, standing in the doorway, a German shell landed not far from them, and Harry was killed by a piece of shrapnel. And unfortunately, that happened the 2nd of November, 1918, 9 days before the end of the war.
So Steve, thank you so much for bringing these artifacts in.
You're very welcome.
I realize that you're a collector and you enjoy the research aspect of this and enjoy finding these objects and discovering more about them. Do you have any plans for these artifacts?
Prior to COVID, I would get invited to speak at different historical societies around the Toronto area. I still want to continue to do that, and I would like to do that out here in Nova Scotia. So I would like to continue putting the objects out there, telling people who these men were, what they fought for, the conditions, and hopefully by the end of it, you don't just see a medical glass in a case here. Now this becomes a person, and that's what I want to do with these objects. I want to take them from being objects and turning them into a person, someone who you can look at, and now you see a face and not just a glass and a black case.
Well, again, thank you so much for bringing them in. It was very interesting to learn about Captain Dunlop.
Well, thanks for having me. This was great.
My final thoughts is like Steve was really trying to stress with this one. When you look at it, it's just glass. It's in this leather case that looks to me like it could have been a German ammunition case ammo pouch that he picked up and thought, oh, I can use this to keep this in there. And so what? But then you've got the name, and you've got, then you can research who he was, where he was, what he did, and all that sort of stuff. So then it becomes a person. And whenever we're going to assign a person to something, I think it makes it far more interesting, and the artifact comes alive.